with indie publishing, when you're approaching schools, obviously, when you're approaching gift shops at the different historical sites that you've written about, how do you overcome that Sue Grafton type stigma against a self-published author?
Well, I think one way is that, you don't bring it up. And I think that sounds funny, but it's true. I think if you have I'm going to say this the right way, if you have an air of confidence and you make the story good and you represent it the way you would want to represent it to show that this is a great book that kids will like, that goes a long way. It's not everything. I like to say that the independent bookstore in Richmond, great little shop called BBGB, and the first two books I had, before I did the third book, I had done my own covers, and I hadn't really learned as much about the whole professional editing, everything. And looking back, they look a little bit unprofessional compared to what I think they look like now. And they kind of looked at me in a lot of that way that you're kind of implying of, well, okay, so yeah, who are you, and what are these books? And this is really not the kind of thing we have. And then a couple of years later, after I got the covers redone and I had started to being a little bit more adopted at local schools and kind of got a little bit of a following, and they started having people ask about my books, suddenly there was a different appreciation, and we have a great relationship, and I've got a shelf in the store with all my books on it now. But I think that all goes hand in hand, right? So you have to find a way, and you have to understand, how do you make this look professional? My goal is always to make my books, the fact that they're not from Random House doesn't mean anything other than that's not on the spine. Other than that, you want them to be indistinguishable from what you would see at a traditionally published company. So I think that's a big part of it. And then with the schools, it's a little bit of a little step at a time. So if you can, I usually say to folks, start with your kid. If you're trying to get into schools and start doing different things, start with your kid's school. Go in there, talk to their class. Don't charge any money. Talk to their class, get some feedback, see if they like it. If they don't, figure out why, and then kind of go back to the drawing board. It's like a little bit of a test audience there. But figure out, what do you want to say? Some folks, especially picture books authors and things, they do a lot of reading. I almost never read for my books when I go to schools. But figure out what would be useful to talk to the students about your book. So I talk a little bit about like my story of how I became an author. I talk about some of the history and the stories, and I show lots of pictures. I do a PowerPoint presentation, which I was used to doing from my job before, so it kind of comes naturally to using PowerPoint. So I show lots of pictures, and I talk about tips for writing, about using description and doing rough drafts, and answering lots of questions. So and being observant to see what are you saying that the kids are laughing at? Where do they look like they're bored and they start looking out the window? Doing a little bit at a time. And then as you start to get some experience and you get 2 or 3 or 4 schools that you've gone to, and you can get them to give you some positive feedback, ask them, hey, would you mind if I used you as a reference, or would you mind writing 2 or 3 sentences describing how, if this is true and if you're comfortable about it, describing how your class or your school enjoyed having me come as an author. And then it's like a lot of things, it starts to be word of mouth, and you start to hear, and you can gradually maybe increase what you're charging to do school visits and things, but it starts to build on each other. It's a lot like, selling books on Amazon. The more experience you get, it's that, I know I've said snowball a dozen times here, but it starts to do that. And I think it's like, that's how any small business starts to get adoption, is you start to gradually get some success, some repeat customers, word of mouth, and you get better at how you're displaying your wares and how you're baking your cake, and it goes that way. And I think the more you can, it's hard because it's an art and a science, right? It's a very artistic endeavor, but it also, especially if you go the indie route, it's very much a business endeavor. And the more you treat it like a business and as a professional endeavor, I think a lot of the tactics that you see in any kind of business, my older kids and I have started watching this show on TV called The Prophet right now, which is really interesting, where they go in and he tries to overhaul people's businesses that are struggling and finding a way. There's a lot of things that you should do if you're trying to run a business the right way. And those are some of the principles that I think you can apply to even things like selling books or doing author visits or different stuff too.
No, I'm hearing the sales background. I'm smiling. Like, yep, that's how you get it done. Get that referral there at the end, of course. And I also, I'm always tickled by the notion of someone going to a bookstore and saying, "All right, excuse me, Mr. Bookstore Clerk, could you show me where all the new Random House books are? Those are the books I really want to read.
Right.
Where are you keeping the Macmillan books?" I'm so excited.
I find that's nice because I mean it's changing even over the years, but most people and certainly if you ask any kid, 99% of them aren't going to worry about. They might know that they got the book at the Scholastic Book Fair at their school, but other than that, they're not really aware. They might know the author's name, they might know the series name, they might know that they like books about Greek mythology, but they don't worry about who's publishing it unless they can tell that it's not the standard that they're used to, and then that's a problem. But they're think of it from their perspective and try to make it as good as it can be, and don't get too hung up on the other things unless, and if there's a problem, then try to adjust and see how you can kind of come at that from a different angle. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but I find if you keep trying as many different things as you can, the things that don't work out, don't do them again and try to find something else and keep doing the things that are working. And, over time, it starts to go in the right direction.
It's one of the many advantages of indie publishing is, if I talk with one of my traditionally published friends and they find a typo in the final book that's in stores, it's, I guess, just weep forever because that typo is now a part of it. Whereas if you're an indie author and, you try to avoid ever having a typo, but if one is brought to your attention, okay, less than 24 hours later, no one is ever going to experience that book with that typo again. It's done. It's the past. And I've changed a couple of covers as well, and it really allows an author to evolve as you get better at what you're doing.
Yeah, I think so. The only time I have, especially since I do a lot of sell books to schools and festivals and different conferences, I've started buying the mystery series kind of in bulk orders from Ingram Spark to try to save on cost. So I get them kind of on a pallet on the back of a big truck. So I get like 750 at a time. So I got a big hallway of books down around the corner. But other than those, once if you have a typo, but you're right. I mean, you can have it fixed by the next day, and no one's the wiser. So it's very nice that way, and you have to stay on top of it, right? You can't just kind of sit back and, well, I did that, and never worry about sales or not worry about updating your pages and the back matter and stuff. You have to stay on top of it. But it is doable, and it's all within your control. Versus the other way, you're right. And sometimes it's just, well, I wish I could do something, but I'm having a hard enough time getting boxes of books from my publisher so I can go to this event I want to do. So it's nice not having to worry about that.